Hello and welcome. In case you don't know who I am, I'm Veronica Valley, and I am going to be talking today about fear. And the reason that I'm going to talk about fear is I don't think it's spoken about enough. And I believe it's the engine that drives an alcohol problem. When I was first getting sober, and I really didn't know if I was going to stop drinking forever, I was kind of had one foot in and one foot out, and I didn't really get it. And I could see that I was maybe drinking too much. And I could also see that I felt so much better not drinking. But I didn't really relate to anybody. Like I was quite young when I stopped drinking. And a lot of the stuff that I thought qualified you to have a problem, like having a DUI, getting arrested, losing a job, none of that stuff had ever happened to me. I just knew that I didn't like how I felt. I didn't like being me, I think is the best way to sum it up. I didn't like being me. So I had kind of one foot in, one foot out. I wasn't drinking. I didn't really get anything. I was kind of still sleepwalking. And I was in a meeting and I heard a middle-aged man talk about fear. And he spoke about fear in the way that I've never heard, or up until that point, I'd never heard anyone speak about fear. And he said that the reason he drank was because he was frightened. And I kind of was rooted to the spot because I'd never heard anyone say that. And as soon as he said it, I just thought, oh God, me too. And I was riveted. And he said he was frightened of everything and anything and nothing. His whole life had been dominated by just fear, which manifests itself as anxiety a lot. Anxiety is just fear. And I just sat there and I was floored because I genuinely, up until that point, believed I was the only person who felt like that. I thought I was the only one who felt that way and nobody else felt that way. So that is what crystallized what an alcohol problem was for me. I was running away from myself. I was running away from myself. I was running away from everything because I was just frightened. I was just really, really frightened. And the list of things that I was frightened of that I wasn't good enough. That's a limiting belief. And my fear was that was true. I was terrified that really was true, that I really wasn't good enough, that I wasn't going to be loved because I wasn't good enough. I was really frightened of what other people thought of me, of not fitting in, of being alone forever. That's a really big fear, I think, for people. Being alone and not being picked, not being chosen, not being fallen in love with. That's a really, really big fear. That was one of mine, hugely. And a lot of clients have shared with me that that's theirs too. You know, we're frightened because that compounds the limiting belief that I'm not really good enough, all of that kind of stuff. I'm frightened. I was frightened of other people, right? Other people I just found really frightening. And I don't mean like, oh, I was terrified of what they was going to do. I was just frightened of interacting with them, of saying the wrong thing, of being misunderstood, and the thing is, here's the thing. I think a lot of people feel like that, and that's kind of normal in a way. It's just with someone like me, it got really out of balance, right? It just became too dominant. And I think that's where the problem comes in. Because fear is programmed into our DNA. It is an emotion, a core emotion. And when I say programmed into our DNA, we experience fear in our bodies. Motion, right? We experience fear as physical sensations. Now, the reason for that is we have core emotions like joy, fear, shame, disgust. There's a few others and there's a bit of disagreement about the core ones, but you know what I'm saying, right? And all of those things you experience as physical sensations in your body. And the reason that we have them programmed into our DNA is for our survival. Because you wouldn't survive without fear. We wouldn't have made it out of toddlerhood, right? If we need fear. Fear is a good thing. It keeps us alive and it keeps us safe. The problem is it gets out of balance. Now, back in the day, we needed that physical sensation, that our stomach clenches or our heart races, or you know what I mean. We experience it in our bodies. We needed that because we needed to make decisions that were usually based on our physical survival, to run or hide from the saber-toothed tiger. For a long, long time, the history of being human has been, there was lots of things that could kill us and wanted to kill us. Most of us, mostly, are fortunate enough that we don't live in situations like that. I'm aware that lots of people do in the world, but most of us don't. I don't. I don't, I'm not afraid to walk around or go places. I'm lucky to live in a place where I don't have those physical threats. Lots of people do, and I'm aware of that. So for a lot of us, our fears are existential, which means it's all in our mind. It's fears of not being loved, not being good enough, being left, not fitting in, etc., etc. And here's the thing. Those fears are also experienced as physical sensations in our bodies. And our bodies, particularly our amygdala in our brain, doesn't know the difference between imagined or real. So the physical sensations are triggered in our bodies and we feel the racing heart or the shortness of breath or the clenched stomach or whatever it is. And it feels the same way our ancestors felt when they saw a saber-toothed tiger coming towards them. We can go into fight, flight, or freeze. So fear it floods us. Those emotions flood us. And it feels like something we can't run or escape from. And it gets out of balance really, really quickly. So that is, for me, fear is the engine that drives an alcohol problem. And it's the one thing we have to learn to get back in balance and get a handle on. Because this is the relationship between fear and alcohol. In terms of quelling fear in that immediate moment, alcohol works pretty much, right? When fear was heightened in me and tipping over into anxiety and all those physical sensations were being triggered, alcohol worked to take that down a notch, to make whatever situation, which was usually a social one, it made it survivable and possible. And that's the catch-22 of it, is it works in the immediate minute when we desperately need something to help us survive the next few minutes and quell, because fear is such an unpleasant experience. We want it to be over as quickly as possible. And alcohol just seems like the answer. Now, of course, it makes everything worse the next day. Our brain chemistry is messed up with, our dopamine is affected, and we feel depressed and low, and the anxiety is heightened, which is just fear. So it's just like pouring gasoline on the fire. But when fear demands an immediate response. It demands your attention. It is not something that can be delayed or pushed away or I'll deal with that tomorrow, right? It demands your immediate attention. And we need an immediate answer. This is why we have to be aware of fear when we first get sober, and we have to find a way to navigate it. Now, we are never going to be free of it, ever, because we wouldn't survive. We need it for our survival, right? You need fear to be careful in some situations, right? Take precautions or make a different decision, right? That's what that emotion is. It's sending us signals like emergency, pay attention here. So we need fear. We're never going to get rid of it. Our job is to manage it. And that's the work of sobriety. That's what we have to learn how to do. Now, the thing about fear is it's a universal experience. And I really believe that lots of people are frightened. More people around you are more frightened than you realize. We just have different ways of hiding it. Fear of other people is a big one. And again, what I mean is fear of interacting, fear of making conversation, fear of going into a room of strangers, fear of what people think. I think that's a really big one for a lot of people. And I think a lot of behaviors that you observe in others and behaviors that we have ourselves, you can trace them all down to fear and trying to manage fear. All most of us are trying to do is manage our fear so that it doesn't manage us. I hope this is making sense to you. So fear is a universal experience. Everyone experiences it. Lots of people are not managing it well, but no one's talking about it. We can talk about like fear when it's something tangible, like frightened of spiders or frightened of the dark or frightened of, those kind of things, right? We can talk about those things. Those are almost sort of safe and appropriate fears we're allowed to talk about. What we can't talk about is the existential fears, the ones that reside deep in our gut, that have control over us and that are often very hard to put into words. And that's how I felt. And going back to my story, when I was first getting sober, I don't think I could have told you I was frightened. I don't think I could have articulated that. And I don't think I could have named that as one of the biggest drivers of why I drank so destructively. But as soon as someone else named it, I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't not know. And it was just this like feeling in my body of, oh my God, that's it. That's it. That's why I've been drinking this way. That's why I felt this way. It's all about how. And then my next thought was, how do I change this? How do I change this? And I think what I'm hoping this will give you listening to this is I hope that it will help you articulate and name what is going on for you and why, not just why you drink the way you do, but why you behave the way you do, right? Fear is underneath and driving a lot of behavior. My husband said something really extraordinary to me on our first date when we first met, and we were talking about relationships. And he said, can you name 5 relationships of people that you know that you envy? And I thought, what an interesting question. He said, by envy, I mean, just you look at that relationship and think, they've really got something, real and special there. And that's what you would aspire to. And I couldn't name 5 relationships. I could, between us, we can, I think. And then I thought about it a bit more. And what I realized is that a lot of people are in relationships based on fear and not love. And that was my truth. We have this kind of saying in sobriety circles that we don't have relationships, we take hostages. And that was my relationship history. I didn't have relationships, I took hostages. Don't leave me, don't leave me, don't leave me, don't leave me. And I wanted to be in the relationship. The reason I wanted to stay in the relationship, the reason I tried to manufacture relationships and make them work, that I enforce my will on people. The reason that I did that was because I was so frightened of being alone. So settling for an inadequate, crumbs from the table relationship in my mind was better than being alone, because I was so frightened of being alone. And I wonder if you've ever felt that way, because again, I've discovered that that's quite common too. So it's crazy, isn't it, that this is such a universal experience, and yet we just don't talk about it. I am going to talk about some ways to deal with your fear, so I will talk about that in a few minutes, because if you've identified yourself so far, then I want you to know that there is a way to navigate and manage your fear. And it really is a life skill. It's a life skill that we have that a lot of us just didn't learn. I'm really hoping that I am modeling and teaching my kids how to deal with their fear, because fear is just a part of life. It's just a part of life. And it's very much when we grow as humans, we're all being called to grow. You're being called to grow. Inevitably, as part of that process, fear and resistance are going to show up. Fear and resistance are going to show up, because growth is always going to be scary, because growth is always about getting out of your comfort zone, and it's about something new and unfamiliar. And by definition, that is frightening. Just like if you're listening to this and this is your call to sobriety, so wanting to stop drinking is a call to growth. It is to be beyond where you are now. And that's going to be frightening. And there's no getting away from that. That's part of the process. But that feeling, and it's entwined with lots of other discomfort, all of those. And they're just feelings we want to change as quickly as possible. That's the thing. We just want to change as quickly as possible, but we are giving up the one thing that takes that feeling away. We are giving up the magic solution that would just take the edge off of that feeling. When we have to learn skills that we haven't learned before. We have to learn them. There's no getting away from it. And you can do this at any point. So that's the good news. So I want to say a little bit more about imagined fears, irrational fears, and real fears. Because the massive irony is that fear feels very, very real, but it is often based on irrational beliefs or imagined responses. Like, we literally make stuff up in our head. That's what we do. We make stuff up, we create a story in our mind, and then that activates feelings of fear, and we continue to tell ourselves the story that activates more feelings of fear, and off we go. Now, knowing this is fine, but it doesn't make the experience any less real, right? Those feelings are very real and they affect us. A child could be scared of monsters under the bed. When I was little, I don't know how little, but when I was a kid, I had this kind of I don't know if it was a dream, whatever, but thought that my bedroom was like a corridor that witches would go down to get to somewhere that they were going. And I had to lay really, really still in my bed, because if they noticed I was awake, they would get me. And I would do all of this in my head. Kids' imaginations are very real. And sometimes I get so frightened I'd have to call for my mum. So we can, see that a child's fear is irrational or silly, that there's no monsters, there's no witches, and we can show them and all that kind of stuff. But once that irrational fear takes hold of you, it can be hard to let go. And I remember having that sort of fear for, it felt like several years, certainly several months. So when we are dealing with fears that are just thoughts in our head, it's no good thinking, oh, just snap out of it, get over it, or don't be silly, because that's not going to work. In fact, it's almost irrelevant what the actual fear is. What's more important is the way that we manage the fear and the way that we navigate it. It's not what we're frightened of is kind of not as significant as how we are going to now deal with how we feel. And I just think that as you go on in an alcohol problem, fear becomes just a default. It's just you just live in constant fear, because you've got fear of what you did last night, of what you said, of the things you have to do today, that it just compounds itself. So let's talk about breaking free from fear. The first thing that I talk to my clients about is, when you feel that sensation in your body, create safety for yourself. So one of the things, and this is really simple, is put both feet on the floor and bring your attention to the room or the place that you're in, and notice that you are safe. So noticing that you are safe, like looking around the room or the environment and noticing that and this is obviously for the imagined existential fears, noticing that there is no threat, that there is nothing here that's going to harm you, and that you also have control, right? You can lock your door, you have your phone, there's people nearabouts. So bringing your conscious mind and awareness to the fact that you are safe and creating that safety for yourself. Like, what do you need? What would help you feel safe? Would it move to a different place? Would it be have your phone in your hand? Like, and creating that safety for yourself. And that will help calm down the amygdala, which is the ancient part of your brain that has been triggered into fight, flight, or freeze, and that is creating all of those really uncomfortable feelings that you're having. So that's the first thing to do. The second thing to do is ask yourself, what is the story I'm telling myself about this? And this is a really powerful question, because we are all telling ourselves stories, and then those are triggering feelings, and then we're acting on those feelings, and around we go. So what is the story you are telling yourself about what's going on right now? Because I'm going to betcha that whatever the story is that's going around in your head, I'm going to betcha that that is not true. And not even not true, wildly inaccurate. Wildly inaccurate. It is crazy how we do this. We all do it. Like, oh my gosh, I used to make up all these stories. They don't like me. They're just putting up with me. I'm going to get rejected, so I'll just leave before they reject me. God, just all these stories. Like, people would do something or say something, and I would make it all about me. And I would make up a story about me that I would then set off a bunch of negative emotions that, of course, then I could then drink on. So asking yourself that question, and then asking yourself, is that true? Is that really what's happening? Again, that kind of grounds us and helps us get to some more rational conclusions. Just so you know, nobody's thinking about you. Nobody's obsessed with you. Actually, nobody really cares. And what I'm saying is, because most people, pretty much everybody, they're obsessed with themselves. They're just obsessed with themselves. So nobody has time or energy to be obsessed with you. I've personally found that really good news, because I was absolutely obsessed with the idea that everybody was obsessed with me and thinking about me and judging me and all these things, but apparently not. And that came as such a relief to know that that was, again, all in my mind. So create safety, ask yourself a question. And then I love this question as well. What would a woman or man who loved herself do next? And that question bypasses the ego, because the ego is going to resist. So by asking yourself that question, you are not saying, I love myself, so what should I do? Because the ego will probably, if you say, I love myself, it will probably go, oh, you're right. Who do you think you are? So we're going to bypass that resistance, and we'll just say, well, if I knew a woman or a man who loved themselves, what would they do next? That's a really interesting and powerful question. What would they do next? Well, they would call a friend, go for a walk, join a sobriety meeting, get a cup of tea, have an early night, etc., etc. So ask yourself that question, see what answer comes, and do that. And those whole processes will help ground you, quieten down the amygdala, and get you back to what is really happening. Now, those are tools that you can use in the moment. I want to say, to really effectively, all we can do with fear is get it back in balance, right? We do not want it to be in charge of us. We want to be able to be in charge of it. So to do that, that's the deeper work that I do with a lot of my clients. It's about getting to the root stuff. So the resentment work, really, really key to this. Activating events, really, really key to all of this, because we've got to dig down into to our belief system, and all of that is hidden in the subconscious mind. This is all basically about what is going on in the subconscious mind. So to really kind of get rid of this long term, we need to get into the subconscious mind and change our programming. That's what we need to do to really kind of get back in balance with fear. And if you are listening to this and you recognize yourself, I want you to know my heart goes out to you, because I know what it's like to live with fear dominating every part of your day and decision. It's horrible. It also shows up as in physical, like, a lot of because we experience this in our bodies, things like irritable bowel syndrome, panic attacks, like lots of gut and stomach issues, headaches. There's lots of physical medical issues that we have that have the root in they started out as fear, and then they're manifesting as physical ailments and issues. That's how powerful it is. I just want you to know there is a solution, there is a way out. You do not have to live the rest of your life feeling like that, because it's a horrible way to live. It's just awful. And I really want people to know that, because I can see it in people. I can see it a lot in people, how they're just trying to keep a lid on their fear, and they don't want to, like, last thing they want to do is have anyone notice that or comment on it or ask for help. So just know that you're not alone. And I hope that this was helpful to you. Please make sure you're subscribing. Please comment below and let me know if this was helpful, if this hit home, all of that kind of stuff. Subscribing to my YouTube channel. I do lots of videos for YouTube. It's a booming community over there, so make sure you're subscribed. Following me on Instagram, Veronica J Valley. And if you want to check out any of my programs where I talk about the solution to all of this, please go to some of the links you'll find nearby or below or on my social media. I have lots of programs that will help you manage and deal with all of the underlying issues related to an alcohol problem. Take care. See you soon.